My top 5 books all had murder in them. I really don't know what that says about me. Hello my loves, and thank you for joining me. It's Kirsten, and today we are doing a recap of the last 3 months of reading. So we have August, September and October's reading, the 5 best and 5 worst books during that time. That's the video that you guys voted on, and in the next 3 months I will also get you to vote again in case you've decided that you want to change how this is done. Regardless, let's get on with this. I think I'm going to do the 5 top books. These are in no particular order. So one that I read in September is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, and this was fantastic. I absolutely loved this book so much. We can see from my tabs, which is something I never do, where I actually tabbed. I had a whole system where I color coded the tabs as well. So blue was for the mystery and murder part of the book, green was for quotes that I just loved, and pink was the romance, which I'm not going to go into too much detail about, but it was fantastic. I loved this. So this is actually like a dark academia mystery thriller type book, and we are following Oliver. Goes to this really elite school where he is an actor, and they are focusing solely on Shakespeare. He has a group of classmates where they're really close with one another, but fractions are starting to appear, tempers are starting to rise. They're in their last year of this university where they know that even if you pass the year, it doesn't mean you're actually going to get a grade out of this. They could still fail you. It's so exclusive at this school, and because they live and breathe Shakespeare, it's referenced a lot in this book. They put on plays of Shakespeare, they talk to each other in the Shakespearean language a lot, using quotes and stuff to express themselves. And while some people don't like that, I really enjoyed it, and you could really see how entrenched they were within Shakespeare. I'm really sorry if you can hear loads of background noise. The neighbours are doing some weirdness today, but it was fantastic. I loved this so much. I did guess how the murder and everything took place, so this is structured how you would expect for a dark academia, where you know that a murder's taken place, and then you have Oliver, our main character, recounting everything that led up to it, but it doesn't specify who's died or who's done the murder. It just specifies that Oliver went to prison for the murder, but did he actually commit it? And that's what's been so interesting about this. So yes, I did guess who died and who killed him, but I didn't care about that because I was just loving seeing all these events take place, the build up of the tension and then the fallout of everything that happened. It was brilliant. I loved this book so much. Another book I loved that I actually read in August, and that's Victor Hugo's Notre Dame de Paris, and I loved this so much. I thought it was fantastic, but the parts that I loved the most weren't actually to do with the story. So obviously we're all pretty aware of the Disney-fied version of this, where you have Quasimodo, Esmeralda and the guard, and that kind of love triangle that ensues with all of that, as well as the nefarious monk, which I mentioned this quite a bit, but honestly, it's always the monk that appears to be the villain. But this was really interesting because it gives you insight into the monk, insight into Quasimodo, Esmeralda. This is obviously a lot darker than the Disney-fied version, and it's a lot more depressing and just sad in places. It's really good. But the parts that I loved most were the chapters. There's 3 chapters in this book that weren't originally part of the story, that don't add anything to the story, but focus on the architecture of Paris. And it's Victor Hugo that is crying out at the crime of how these beautiful buildings are being defaced, and how architecture is the way people would write then, because we didn't have things like the printed book and things like that back in like really far back, where we had all these beautiful buildings. And he goes on to say how the printed word will make it so that our buildings lose that beautiful differentness about them that they will all become plain and grey and boring because of it, because we no longer use architecture as a way to express ourselves. And that's what he's talking about, like just that the rise of the book will see the fall in architecture. And it was fantastic. I loved those passages so much. I found them so interesting. It was really sad that there was only 3 in there, and it didn't add anything to the storyline, so you could easily skip over if that's not something you're interested in to carry on with the actual story. But those parts I fell in love with. It was so interesting to see his views on this, and also true in a way, because a lot of our buildings are boring buildings now, and all of those beautiful ones that we love, like Notre Dame, are from so long ago. And it was just, yeah, really enjoyed that. That was actually my favourite parts of this book. To carry on with the classics, one that I've read very recently is The Uncensored Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Now, I wasn't going to be putting any rereads on here, but technically this isn't officially a reread. I've read the censored version, but I've never read the uncensored version till October, and I loved this. This was fantastic. Hands down my favourite read of the month. I annotated every single page. It was brilliant. You could really see the love that Basil has for Dorian Gray in this. The long monologues that he gives for it, and also the parts that were taken out because it was too explicit for public consumption at that time. And what Oscar Wilde didn't realise is that his book was actually edited without his knowledge, and he didn't realise it until it was published, and that's something that's just so heartbreaking that happened. It was fantastic though. It's an amazing book. This is the only version of the book that you can get, and it's not widely sold, so like Waterstones and that don't supply it. It's a really good book. I would highly recommend, if you like The Picture of Dorian Gray, read the uncensored version. I adored it. I fell in love with it. Obviously it is the story of Dorian Gray, where we have him that makes this bargain almost with the devil to stay young and beautiful and pristine while the picture gets older and shows all of his sins. And he doesn't put much stock in it. He kind of said it in a moment of madness, and then he realizes, oh my gosh, this is actually happening. And you just see his descent into depravity, how he's been manipulated by Harry, how all of that, it's fantastic. It's so good. It's brilliant. And it is also, people argue, kind of like the classic of dark academia, and you can definitely see those vibes where he has this obsession for learning and this obsession over this one particular book. It's brilliant. I loved it. It was fantastic. Probably my favourite classic book in general now. It was so good. I mean, I still love Jane Eyre, but this, upon reread, like, this was good. We then have a YA murder mystery, but this is one I found so fun, and that's The Agathas by Kathleen Glasgow and Liz Lawson. So I read this in August, and I fell in love with it. It was so good. So it's a fun, silly YA murder mystery. We have 2 main characters. So you have Alice, who is obsessed with Agatha Christie, and she was the queen bee of the school, but now she's not, because she pulled off an Agatha Christie where she went and disappeared for a bit and then came back, and her friends are all really angry at her because of this. And then we have Iris, and Iris is someone that kind of struggles for money a lot more. Alice and Iris really don't cross paths. They're not people that would ever interact, but Iris is then taken on to tutor Alice. But at the same time as this, Alice's former like best friend gets murdered, and the person that they think's done it, Alice is like, no, there's no way. And so she kind of ropes Iris into it, where they then investigate it, and Alice is like, well, I read all the Agatha Christie books, so I know what I'm doing. And it was just hilarious. It was a great fun time. I even made a mind map. I got so invested in it that I made a mind map of who I think it could be. I actually solved it. I was really excited that I solved it. I had all my clues lined up about why I thought it was that person, the breadcrumbs that I'd picked up on and stuff, but it still had enough questions to go, but is it actually that person? How do these other things link into this person? It was so well done. I had such a good time with it. So yeah, there is going to be a second book coming out, and I'm eagerly anticipating it, but there's no release date yet, but you can guarantee that I will be getting that. This was such a fun time. And of course, mentioning a character that was obsessed with Agatha Christie, I did start my Agatha Christie journey. So I read this one in September, and that's the Tuesday Club Murders by Agatha Christie. And this is the short stories of Miss Marple, and I enjoyed this so much. There are 13 short stories in here, and we're introduced to Miss Marple as a character. And at first, Miss Marple is with this group of people, and they decide to do a game where they give each other a mystery that's happened, where they know the outcome of it but don't tell them. They kind of just give them all the facts and then see whether anyone can work it out, but nobody ever does apart from Miss Marple, and they are always so shocked at this at first. They're just like, we just kind of said that she could join in to be polite but didn't think that she would actually be good at this. And Miss Marple has such a wandering way of getting to the results and the answers, and it was always right. So that's the first few, and then it changes to a dinner party where they do the same thing, and Miss Marple is invited again. She's the only one that solves it. And the very last story is an actual murder that's taken place, and Miss Marple goes to a colonel, well, an ex-colonel who was a part of each of these groups, and says, I know who did it, but I can't go to the police because they will not believe me. So I'm going to tell you. She writes it down on a piece of paper who did it, and then he goes, okay, I believe you, I trust you, I'm going to investigate this. And he does struggle. He goes back to her at one point and says, look, I can't see how they did it. And then Miss Marple gives them a hint, and then he's like, ah. And again, she was right. But it was just how Miss Marple definitely seems to be a person in the future books, based off of that last short story, where she is someone that takes more of a step back, doesn't get too involved with everything, but is just there as like the guiding influence leading them to the person that's done it. So I'm really intrigued. This one really piqued my interest of reading full novels by Agatha Christie and just starting that journey. I really enjoyed this. It was really good. So those were my top 5 for the last 3 months. Let's go to the 5 worst books. Again, no particular order. So I do actually have a few DNFs over the last few months. I've gotten a lot easier with just DNFing a book, so I thought I'd talk about a couple of those. One of them being Witch Child, which I've still got my bookmark in, but I really am not going to go back to this book. And this is by Celia Rees, and I was really excited by this book because it's all about witches. It's about this witch that's trying to escape persecution, and it starts off so promising, where you have our main character, her grandmother is persecuted for being a witch, she gets tortured and everything, and our main character then has to run away. However, it then really slows down. She goes into this group of Puritans, and yeah, I just lost interest. It really wasn't that gripping, and I've had one of you comment on here how the second book just isn't that good anyway, and that if I don't enjoy it, just leave it, and I'm taking that advice and leaving it. So yeah, I don't have loads to talk about this one. I got almost halfway through. It is done in diary entry format, so it's very quick, very easy to read, but I just found it so boring, which was a shame because it had such a promising start. A book I didn't DNF but still found a bit disappointing is Lonely Castle in the Mirror by Mizuki Tujimura. I did a better job of pronouncing this before, sorry. And this was a book that I was really excited about because it's a portal fantasy. So we're following our main character, Kokoro. Oh, I should mention that this book is translated from Japanese by Philip Gabriel. But we're following Kokoro, and she has been bullied at school. She no longer attends school. She spends all of her time at home. And you know that there was this big incident that happened, but you don't know exactly what. And then she stumbles across the castle in her mirror. So her mirror starts glowing one day, she steps through it, and there is a castle there where she also meets other children like her. It was interesting, but I feel like this book was trying to do too much. It was a lot of focus on bullying, which I don't particularly like reading. But then the parts that were actually about the portal fantasy side of things, and like there are fairy tale influences in this book, I loved so much. But it was few and far between, and there was just a lot of like silliness between the characters because they're young kids, they have silly fights and stuff, and it kind of felt like a weird middle grade but not quite a middle grade, and I just felt like the characters were just really young, which it was good because they are young, they are at school for all of this. I just couldn't connect with them as well, and it was just something that I'd placed so much expectations on because I thought it would be a really good portal fantasy, to then not quite fulfill those requirements, and the portal fantasy aspects of this book just didn't deliver quite as well as I hoped, although parts of it, as I said, when they were integrated with the fairy tale side of things, were very good. But I would say that about 80% of this book I didn't enjoy reading, so it's a shame. Oh my gosh. Then we have a book I DNF'd, and wow. Okay, so I still got my bookmark in. I got to page 72, and yeah, this was terrible. This is Chilling Effect by Valerie Uvaldes. Now, this is sci-fi. I don't tend to read a lot of sci-fi, but I really wanted to branch out and just to try, see if I like it. I do like some young adult sci-fi, but adult sci-fi is something I've yet to find that I enjoy. And this one sounded really intriguing because it had psychic cats, and I was like, that sounds great. I'm interested in that, especially because the psychic cats are mentioned on the synopsis. They're on the front here as well. I thought they would play a really big part, but after the second chapter, they fade into the background. They really aren't a part of this at all. But the main thing I didn't like about this book was the consistent talk about farts. Like, consistently, like, farts were used as a way to describe things all the time. Like, to describe something, they were like, oh, it smelled like a fart. But consistently, all the time. I don't understand why. And there were loads of profanities throughout this book, like constantly. There were some Spanish words in here as well, which I don't mind that at all. And I took the time to research what some of them were, because if I can't infer the meaning from what's going on, I will research and look it up. And it just turned out to be more swearing. I'm just like, what's the point? What is the actual point of that? So yeah, I put it down. Also, so much happened, so everything that happened on the synopsis happened in the first 70 pages. It is so fast paced, and you just don't even feel the stakes of it because so much is happening all at once. It was so chaotic, and yeah, no. That's that one. And then I have another book that just disappointed, and that's Sally Rooney's Conversations with Friends. I read Normal People by Sally Rooney and really liked that book, really connected to it. Contemporary is something that I don't tend to read loads of. I dabble in it every so often, and Normal People really exceeded my expectations. I really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, Conversation with Friends just felt a little bit flat. I think because it was all from one perspective. So we're following, her name's not even on the back. I can't find her name in the first few pages, but we're following our main character. She has a best friend, Bobby. They used to date one another, but don't anymore, although they still do poetry recitals and everything together. They then get tangled up in this woman called Melissa, who has a very lavish lifestyle, and her husband Nick. And you see how our main character kind of gets stuck between them. Her and Nick end up having this affair. She has the fallout with Bobby as a result of all of this. Like, it's just a messy time. I just couldn't connect with it as much. Like, I just wasn't as interested. I found it boring, and I found the one perspective to just be a bit frustrating. I think Normal People worked so much better for me because we had the two different perspectives, so we got to see it from two different points of view. And I think if we had our main character and maybe like Nick's perspective, or even Bobby's perspective, it would have been so much more interesting. Although I will say I did prefer the ending of this, just because Normal People, I really hoped for that ending. It didn't happen, but that's life. Whereas this one kind of had the ending that I wanted for Normal People. But apart from that, I did just find this very like, meh. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. It was just meh. And then the last book is one that I DNF'd and just gave up with, and that is The Classic Tales of Horror by Edgar Allan Poe. This is the second book by Edgar Allan Poe I've tried reading, and I didn't like the first one, and I don't like this. And I did give up. There's 20 short stories in here. I read 3. I read the first 2, and I also read The Telltale Heart, and I didn't like any of them. I found them all to be very ridiculous, not scary at all, and someone that is a wuss and gets scared very easily, I'm highly disappointed in that. I just found the writing to be silly. Honestly, it was just the things that were happening were nonsensical. It wasn't scary. There were points where it was just brutal for like a shock factor, but it didn't work because there wasn't any of the build. I didn't like it. I can actually say that this is probably the one that I didn't like the most out of the DNFs. So Witch Child was just ended up being a little bit boring, but that's just the way it is. Chilling Effect was just farts and swearing, but Edgar Allan Poe, I was really disappointed by because I really wanted to love his work, but just every single time I cannot get on with his writing style at all because I just find it so ridiculous, and that's the most disappointing part. But there we go, those were my top 5 and worst 5 books of the last 3 months. I hope you enjoyed this way of doing just a quick overview wrap up instead of a really in-depth one. I definitely preferred doing this, and hopefully you did too. Let me know what's been your favourite book that you've read over the last few months, or what's been your worst book. Have you DNF'd any books? Let me know in the comments below. And I think for this month, for this video, let's put, you know, a lot of these books have been darker reads, have some sort of like murder going on in them. Actually, all of them had murder. So let's put the skull emoji, because my top 5 books all had murder in them. I really don't know what that says about me. Clearly that's what we like. So let's put a skull emoji, and if you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it that thumbs up, subscribe, comment to let me know that you're here. Social media links will be linked below, and I will of course catch you in the next one.